Welcome to Pleasure Uprising. I'm Dr. Laura Juergens, intimacy coach, somatic practitioner, and your guide to getting out of your head and into your body, your desire, and your real capacity for connection. This show is for people who are done performing and ready to actually feel it. Let's go. Hello, my dears. Hi, I am glad you are here today. We're going to talk about something that comes up so much in my practice and comes up so much in my life and with everybody I know. I want to just talk about attachment wounds and intimacy. So let's think about this for a second. So something maybe turns you on that you've never been quite able to explain. Maybe it surprises you. Maybe it's the same thing every time. Maybe you felt a vague shame about it, or kind of a boredom with it, or both. Or maybe you've avoided knowing it. Maybe you've avoided knowing what actually turns you on. In another scenario, maybe you keep having the same dynamic in relationships, like the pull towards the same sort of wrong people, or the pattern of either kind of constantly chasing someone or constantly withdrawing. The same moment where intimacy reaches a certain depth and you either kind of freak out or run away, right? And you may have already heard of attachment styles. Maybe you've taken a quiz, maybe you've read a book, maybe you've quote unquote diagnosed. Maybe you've been quote unquote diagnosed by a partner or a friend. Maybe you've spent some time convinced that you're anxiously attached or avoidantly attached or both at the same time, which is called disorganized. And all of that is a start, right? But here's what I want to offer you. Attachment styles are the surface and usually misunderstood. And also, they are related to that thing that turns you on that either you've never been able to quite explain or fully acknowledge. And underneath our attachment patterns is something much more specific and more personal and more directly connected to our erotic lives than most of us understand or expect. These things are linked. And this is the introduction episode for a series I'm going to offer you on attachment wounds and erotic needs, desires, turn-ons. Both erotic and actually relational needs and desires in intimacy. And we're starting here with this sort of overview introduction episode before I dive into the specific attachment wounds, because there's a lot. We need you to have the foundation before we get into the specific patterns. And I want to be really honest about where the standard framework for attachment styles falls short, especially the way most people are applying it in their lives. And I want to help you understand how it relates not just to your relational needs and your patterns of behavior, but also to growth and change in your life, into the goals that you have for relationship, for getting what you want in relationship, and deeply, deeply relates to your erotic desires and your needs during sex and what feels great for you in playtimes. So we're going to dive into all of that, and we're going to start with what attachment styles actually are and what they're not, because there's a lot of misinterpretations. So first up, let's do a quick orientation for anyone newer to this. Attachment theory describes psychological patterns or kind of like blueprints for how we learned to bond with other people. And they form early in childhood based on how reliably our needs were met, typically. But they can also change over the course of our lives, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The four main styles that we encounter in sort of mainstream attachment theory are, number one is secure attachment. So this means comfortable with closeness and intimacy, including emotional intimacy, able to trust, being able to be both intimate and independent, and able to be independent as well. And anxious, which is a person who tends to fear abandonment, They may seek a lot of reassurance, and they tend to pursue in relationships. The other really common one to talk about is avoidant. And this is a person who generally in this schematic fears that intimacy will kind of trap them, and they may value independence to the point of withdrawing in self-protection. Then there is disorganized, and this is someone who craves connection and also fears it at the same time. And this is often connected to early experiences where the caregiver was both a source of safety and a source of threat. And disorganized is kind of anxious plus avoidant, and they kind of can swing back and forth. Now, look, these 4 categories are genuinely useful as a starting point. They can give you an understanding of some patterns that you may have seen and been living for years. They may help you understand behaviors of your own and your partner or your friends or other people you're in relationship with, your parents, your siblings. But I really want to encourage you to think of them less as diagnoses or boxes to put people in, including yourself, and more like settings on a mixing board. You can be higher in some areas and lower in others, and those settings are not fixed, nor are they consistent from one partner or relationship to another. So you can think of them as different songs are going to have different mixing board settings, right? And those are your different relationships. So the way that a lot of people are using this, attachment theory has gotten really mainstream, and people are applying it kind of almost like a personality test, which is really not correct and not accurate. And it can really box you in and make it feel, 1, super pathological, 2, as if you need to like manage this sort of life sentence kind of situation. And it's really not that. So let's talk about some limitations, because attachment styles are not personality traits. They are learned, context-dependent habits. They are habits. I want to say that again. Attachment styles are habits that you learned. You can learn them and unlearn them and shift and change and grow. You can become securely attached, I promise, because I did. If you ever see my results, like my parents, I am like massively avoidant and anxiously attached there. But my primary relationships, my deep friendships are all like I'm absolutely securely attached. And I learned that with consistent support and the right work. I learned it. You can too. A secure person can actually become anxiously attached after a really devastating relationship. And an anxious person can become substantially more secure, like fully securely attached with consistent support and the right work. A person can also be avoidant under certain circumstances. Like when you talk to somebody a particular way, it can bring out their avoidant, but they can also become secure if that communication style changes. And these patterns, they're formed in relationship, so they can change in relationship. So I really want you to understand that none of it is a life sentence. And critically, your attachment style with one person is not your attachment style with everyone. You can be avoidant with a partner who is emotionally unavailable, or you can be avoidant with a partner who is extremely clingy, and function securely with a close friend who shows up consistently and respects your boundaries and your autonomy. Your nervous system is responding to very specific conditions of each relationship. Now, you can have tendencies, right, where you have a tendency to be more anxiously attached or more avoidantly attached. And that's what most people are running into with themselves. And that is really it is valuable and worth understanding and noticing. But there's a lot of things that can change your attachment response: the other person's emotional availability, their communication style, the felt level of safety and autonomy in the dynamic, and also, really critically, how much you have learned to manage your own tendencies and have secure attachment with yourself. Secure attachment with yourself is the foundation of secure attachment with other people. Quick break. If you are listening to this show, something in your intimate life may not be where you want it to be. And if you've been trying to think or talk your way through it and it's not quite working, that's not a you problem. That's just a method problem. I made a free guide to help called Get Out of Your Head, a starter guide to releasing the pressure, shame, and shoulds around intimacy. It has some reflection exercises that go deeper than anything you'll typically find in a freebie, and most people feel something shift after just the first one. So go grab it at laurajurgens.com/guide, and the link is in the show notes. And the other thing that changes your response is whether something about someone actually triggers associations with people who were unsafe in your past. And that is worth noticing. You may react to a new person as though they're someone you knew before, someone who hurt you or frightened you, when they actually are not that person or haven't done that thing. Your nervous system can make associations and run old programs, which is not about that person. It's about the wound. Or you can just maybe they have done some of those things, but they've done them less severely than somebody in the past, and you're still responding as if their sort of behaviors were as bad as this person in the past. And so an example for me is there is somebody at my gym. And I'm going to tell you, this happened this morning. So this is not old news. There is somebody who I feel around this person like I am around the worst middle school bully. And it is because the way that she behaves is very much like this kind of like mean girl style, with a lot of passive aggressive, like eye rolling and sarcasm and like kind of pointed, like complaining about people and putting people down who aren't present, like, oh, I hate those people who do this, that, or the other. My nervous system is on high alert around this person. And it is something that I have literally had to manage on the regular. And I try as hard as possible never to be in the space right next to her because I know my nervous system is going to be pulled back into middle school, and I'm going to spend the entire time that I'm trying to lift weights actually managing my nervous system response, which is not that fun. So just, it happens, right? It's totally okay. It's part of being a human, but it's worth knowing. I have to tell myself, hey, this is not then. I am an adult. I don't have to interact with this person. And if I do choose to interact with them, I can tell her to fuck off if I want to, right? There's zero social consequences really to me if I just decide not to engage with this person. I have to walk myself through that because my nervous system is running an old pattern. So I just want to say, none of this is pathologizing, right? You don't have to feel bad about your attachment wounds. You don't have to feel super mad at your parents about them. Now, look, you may have very justifiable anger, and that is absolutely legitimate and valid. But you also can just recognize that none of us get through this life without some wounds, and they don't have to harm you forever. And they don't have to determine how you interact with the people closest to you. All of this stuff is changeable and flexible because they're habits, they're not life sentences. Okay, so attachment styles have just become, a really trendy way for people to label themselves and each other instead of a tool for growth. And that makes me so sad because what I hear people saying out in the world, when I go just wander through the coffee shop, is things like, I'm avoidant, so I just need more space than he's giving me. Or I'm anxious, so I need reassurance more than I'm getting, and I need to just break up with this person because they're not giving me enough reassurance. This can become, if you kind of label yourself or over-identify with the attachment style, it can become a reason not to do anything differently or a reason not to grow. And even labeling other people, right? My ex was anxious or my ex was so avoidant can become a way to avoid looking at your own part in a relationship dynamic. And diagnosing your partner's attachment style while it can be very tempting and very satisfying to our own ego, is rarely as useful as looking at the dynamic that the two of you created together, especially if you don't want to just repeat it. You want to also look at where you have power, which means you contributed to the situation, because there's always two people in the relational situation. Now, that doesn't mean both people are problematic, but, did I allow this more than I should? Could I have had stronger boundaries here? Could I have taken care of myself better? What could I have done differently? What would I want to do differently next time? Okay. And then, so don't use them to pathologize yourself. Don't label yourself or your partner with attachment styles, even if it's useful to kind of have a general sense of your own patterns. I also want to just say they only capture one dimension of a person. They don't tell you anything about emotional maturity, empathy, communication habits, what happened to someone, that where they are on the path of kind of managing those attachment wounds. Because some people may have anxious, avoidant, or disorganized tendencies, but they're really good at actually managing those things. And they have a lot of maturity and empathy, and they can own those patterns, right? They also don't tell you anything about your capacity for secure attachment in the future. And so I think it's really important to recognize the fluidity of all this stuff. Okay, so that said, if you want a sense of your attachment patterns in context, not as an abstract personality trait that you're self-diagnosing, but in the context of your specific relationships, your closest relationships in your life, the best quiz I've found is Dr. R. Chris Fraley's, and I'm going to link it in the show notes. He's a professor at the University of Illinois, and it asks about attachment in relationship context, which is the only way it actually means anything. And I'm going to move on from that, but I will give you that tool. I recommend checking it out if you're curious. But I want to move us beyond attachment styles, because attachment styles are very limited in how much actual information they give us. And you don't have to identify with it, right? You can observe it, work with it, change it. But there's real childhood wounds underneath a lot of those patterns. And sometimes they're adult wounds. Sometimes they're adaptive to really dysfunctional relationships we've been in as adults. But all of us actually have, typically almost everybody has some sort of ways that their childhood wasn't absolutely 100% perfect. And some of us get in the sort of pain Olympics of comparing pain. And I have to encourage you to not do that. It's not really helpful. I used to do it hardcore. I used to be a hardcore pain comparer, my childhood versus your childhood. And I tried to use it I think I was trying to use it to understand myself and understand other people, but what it was really doing was keeping me in kind of a lack in judgment and a lack of empathy for both myself and for others. And made me feel really other, made me feel really different from people. And what I came to realize was that actually everyone has some sort of childhood wounds. The people with the best parents in the world have still some things that just didn't, through no fault of their parents' own, because nobody is perfect. There are some things that just kind of hurt, never got repaired, right? Or there are some circumstances that happened. You can have amazing parents and still have a traumatic birth, or a sibling who got cancer, or, all kinds of things can happen, right? Something bad can happen to you. You can still get run over by a car, whatever. You were in the hospital for 6 months after that. People have pain. And when it happens to us early in life, it really does shape how we cope, our coping mechanisms, and the habits that we get in for relating to other people. And so childhood wounds are things to become aware of so that we can grow beyond them and build the kinds of relationships and intimacy we actually want. I feel really grateful that that's possible. They're not, things to be attached to and identify with and think of as something that we have to carry with us constantly in the forefront of our minds forever, but they are things that we may always have to kind of manage. Because they happen early in life, they tend to set a lot of the ways that we relate to ourselves and the ways that we relate to other people. And also, there's some people you will never have secure attachment with, not because there's anything broken about you, but because they just aren't capable of secure attachment. And that is real. People who have severe personality disorders, for example, are on the one end a really good example of people who you will never have secure attachment. You will never have secure attachment with a narcissist or someone with borderline personality disorder. I can tell you that right now. And maybe I'm wrong, but I've never met anyone who could manage that. I just don't think it happens. I'm not saying that from any sort of clinical expertise other than just life experience. I don't think it's possible. Personally, that's a personal opinion. But the more you build secure patterns within yourself and with people who are capable of genuinely reciprocating that secure attachment, those patterns, those skills, and those behaviors, because at the end of the day, secure attachment is really about new habits. It's about behaviors. It's not just about how you feel. It's about what you do. And that also, and how you think, and those things also impact how you feel. And when you do that, the more you'll notice and trust your discernment when someone isn't capable of actually meeting you there. And in my practice, a lot of what we work on with intimacy are the specific skills that underlie secure attachment and that help soothe our core childhood wounds. They are learnable. They are not reserved for people who had perfect childhoods, but remember that there's pretty much no one who had it completely perfect. Okay, so let's talk about what the core skills are of secure attachment. And then I'm going to give you a little preview about the wounds that are under attachment styles. And we're going to then dive into them more in future episodes. So the core skills of secure attachment. This is not a comprehensive workshop. I'm not going to teach you all about this today in a podcast in the remaining time that we have. I'm just kind of giving you a little overview of the terrain. So number one, emotional regulation. When we're building secure attachment, you want to have the ability to calm your own body and mind when you get activated, to feel what you're feeling without immediately having to act it out or act it in and shut yourself down. You want to be willing and able to care for your own inner experience with compassion rather than blame or like over self-indulgence or suppression, and see your feelings and emotions as messages, not emergencies. Number two is clear communication and interdependence, not codependence. So this is like being able to share what you feel without attacking or blaming or having a shame over and melting down, right? Expressing what you need directly, not hinting, hoping somebody guesses, or performing some sort of helplessness, right? Or passive aggression. Listening to what someone else needs without collapsing into shame or defensiveness. Offering what is genuinely within your limits, not what you think will keep someone from leaving. And understanding that you will not always get your needs met, and being able to resource yourself and really hold your own hand through the disappointment that reality engenders, right? It is survivable when we don't get our needs met, but it is okay that it's disappointing. So number three is having kind limits. One of the things that we build and work on is kind boundaries, not threats, not passive aggression, knowing and being able to feel in your body where your own boundaries are, being able to use those emotions that we, like just what we just talked about knowing your feelings are messages, not emergencies, being able to use those messages to know where your boundaries are and being able to articulate them kindly, not with ultimatums, no cold shoulders, no ghosting. Those are emotional coercion where you're trying to control somebody through your behaviors. Instead of, that's not communication. So respecting the limits others set without experiencing them as threats or abandonment, knowing how to hold your own boundaries without panicking and allowing others to have theirs, right? This all falls under this kind boundaries. Number 4, skills of building secure attachment, self-reflection and a growth orientation. So that means being able to look at our own patterns honestly, to admit when we made a mistake or even caused some hurt to someone, being able to hear how we've hurt someone from them without immediately making it all about our own shame and collapsing the whole conversation onto ourselves. Knowing that we are imperfect and still acceptable and worthy of love. That it is okay for us to make mistakes and we are still lovable. All right. And then the last one in the sort of skills of building secure attachment is comfort with both closeness and distance, intimacy and space. So this means being able to genuinely be intimate and close with someone and trust them, and also being able to be genuinely able to be alone and be with yourself without one having to threaten the other. The other thing, not panicking, right, when our partner needs distance, and not abandoning yourself when they need closeness, right? Respecting your needs and their needs and negotiating through that. Being able to share vulnerably and receive someone else's vulnerability. And trust that the connection can hold even when you're not in contact. These are things that really show that we can be close and we can have distance, and we can be close with ourselves. We can be comfortable with ourselves and with someone else. So those are that's just kind of an overview of the landscape of what building secure attachment looks like. And you'll notice that those are skills. Those are learnable behaviors and ways of being, which is really good news. Really good news. Yay. For all of us who had really difficult experiences in life. Congratulations. They are not a life sentence. And you can go from having very dysfunctional relational dynamics like me, where you have no idea how to do any of that, to actually learning all of it step by step. Yay. It was the best news. It is so satisfying. So wonderful. So this is how we build secure attachment. But what I want to say is that I want to expand what you're working with, because attachment styles do not capture the full picture. Attachment styles tell you something real and useful, but they describe the surface habit patterns, anxious, avoidant, secure, disorganized, whatever, without necessarily telling you what specific early wounds are running underneath them and how they relate to intimacy. Because it's more than just needing reassurance or space. Real developmental wounds, so childhood wounds, have entire constellations of coping mechanisms around them, and we really needed those. They served us well in the past, but they may be in our way now in adult relationships. And to be honest, they may also actually be pleasurable to play with in other ways in our erotic life. And both of those things can be true. We can play with some of the desires that we have because they are shaped by a lot of our childhood wounds. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more today and in the remaining time we have, and then in the next series when we talk about all the specific wounds. But let's dig into this, right? Because two people who both we would say are anxiously attached can have completely different developmental wounds driving that pattern. One might have a deep safety wound. The world never felt safe. And anxiety is how the nervous system has coped with that, is by kind of constantly scanning for what could happen and worrying about it, and then trying to control and manage the environment through that worry and anticipation of disaster. Another person might actually have a dependency wound where their needs were never reliably met, and anxiety is specifically about whether this particular person is going to show up to meet my needs. And so we can have the same label with different roots and different implications for intimacy, different implications for our specific relationships and our eroticism and our erotic needs. And understanding more deeply the sort of wounds underneath can give you much more to work with than this sort of style label does. It actually will tell you, if you understand what the developmental wounds are, what the body's reaching for, what the psyche, what the heart is reaching for. And that is the part that tends to surprise people. And it also can tell us what this person tends to crave in their erotic space and why, and help people de-shame it and understand it is actually just part of something that is an attempt at healing and can be very healing in the erotic space. And that's wonderful. The same nervous system adaptations that shaped our attachment patterns actually do shape our turn-ons. And the same unmet needs that generated anxious or avoidant patterns are actually written into our erotic imaginations. So we're going to talk about, in this series, we're going to talk a lot about how early childhood wounds become erotic desires. And I want to first really encourage you to listen to way back when, episode number 5 on psychological arousal and erotic emotions, to understand what I mean more deeply. I go into it in a bit more detail about what I mean about the 2 different pathways to get to erotic emotions and core desires. I'm going to go over them in brief here today, but I encourage you to listen to that episode because I think it's illuminating for a lot of people. So briefly, how our wounds become erotic emotions? So research and clinical work in this area, we have Jack Morin's work on what he called core erotic themes, the Somatica Institute, where I was trained, the core desires framework that was developed by Dr. Danielle Harrell and Celeste Hirschman at Somatica Institute. All of this work consistently shows that our deepest erotic desires are shaped by early unmet needs, attachment needs. They're not random. They're not cultural conditioning alone. They're specifically shaped by what we needed and didn't fully get as children. And there are 2 pathways that we see that this takes. One we call resolution. This is the Somatica terminology. And the other we call repetition with agency. So resolution is seeking in the erotic space the emotional experience that you missed, that you didn't get. So it could be unconditional love, being truly seen, being free and supported in your autonomy, right? All kinds of things. But this is whatever the wound was. The resolution pathway is like the opposite of that experience, the emotional experience that you craved and didn't get. The other pathway is called repetition with agency, and this one surprises people a lot. It is the desire to re-experience the challenging emotional experience that you did have, but with full choice and safety. And it can be profoundly healing, but a lot of people are worried about this one because it looks like on the outside, like negative, quote unquote, negative emotions, like you want to have something negative happen to you. But actually, this is not pathological at all. This is the desire to experience what was a scary emotion as a child in safety with agency as erotic play. So Somatica calls these core desires. I call them erotic emotions, the specific feelings that your erotic psychology system is actually seeking underneath whatever scenario, fantasy, or dynamic you're being drawn to. It's not the act. And a lot of times we don't actually even want to do the act in real life. It's the emotion that we're craving. And sometimes actually just running those things in fantasy gives us that emotion. And many of them we actually want to keep in fantasy because we wouldn't feel safe to play with them in real life. And that's okay too. So Morin called these core erotic themes. Somatica calls them core desires. I tend to call them erotic emotions. It's all the same deal. I like erotic emotions as a term because it reminds us all that what we're really craving is an emotional experience, not just a scenario, a position, a scene, a toy, a fantasy, right? The thing itself that we could do in real life, that's not what we're craving. We're craving the emotional experience. And so that's what this series is going to do. And I'm going to do 5 developmental wounds and how they play out specifically in eroticism and intimate relationships. We're going to identify the wound, name what's underneath the attachment behavior, and map how each one tends to shape our erotic imagination. And you may recognize yourself in one or several of them, and you can even have all of them. Not that many people in my experience have all of them, but some of us do. And it's totally okay to have more than one. Many times that is the case, right? And that's okay. And most people have some version of at least one of them in some way, shape, or form, but not necessarily everybody. We are going to do the 5 wound patterns are each going to get their own episode. I'm going to give you the sort of preview before we close out today, which is the safety wound, which is like, is it even safe to exist? Is it safe to be in my body? Is it safe to be here at all? There's a dependency wound, which can go in a couple different directions, and it manifests as can be like, are my needs welcome or am I too much? Is needing pointless? Am I allowed to even have needs? Or will my needs ever be met? Right? And it tends to kind of go in 2 polar directions, and we'll talk about those. There's also a trust wound, which is like, is it safe to be vulnerable or will that be used against me? There's an autonomy wound. Can I be fully myself? Am I allowed to even be who I am and still be loved? And there's a worth wound. Am I loved for what I do for others, what I produce, what I earn, or can I just be loved for who I am unconditionally? And none of these, like I said, are mutually exclusive. I can promise you I carry more than one. Many, many other people do, and you can function fully and well and have a wonderful life with one or all of them. But each episode's going to dive into those, and none of them makes you broken or beyond reach. They just make you human. So to review from today, attachment styles are not a personality type. They are mutable and changeable, and you can learn secure attachment. There's specific behaviors and characteristics of thinking that go into secure attachment. And there's more going on underneath all these labels that's really worth understanding about the wounds that actually shape us and our needs and what we're trying to get. And when we know that, we actually have more ability to get those needs met, to care for ourselves through that, and to celebrate our own eroticism and our playfulness and in our connection with others. So I have an extra resource that I want to offer you that might be helpful. You'll hear it if you go back to that episode 5, you'll hear it in there. It's called The Wheel of Erotic Emotions, and it's a visual map of common erotic emotions. It's not exhaustive. There's other ones out there, but even just seeing them can help you triangulate where any that you might have that are missing from the list might be. But it's a visual map of common erotic emotions organized by kind of general category. And it's a useful companion for you as you try to understand your own erotic landscape. You can download it at laurajurgens.com/wheel. laurajurgens.com/wheel. And take a look, see what you think, keep it handy, and I'll see you here next time. Hey, before you go, if you enjoyed this show, I want to invite you to check out one of my favorite things that I've ever created. It's a free guide called Get Out of Your Head, a starter guide to releasing the pressure, shame, and shoulds around intimacy. It has 4 reflection exercises that go deeper than anything you'll find in a typical freebie, and most people feel a shift just after part 1. So go grab it at laurajurgens.com/guide. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to find out what your specific path looks like, I'd love to talk to you. Booking info is also in the show notes, and I will see you here next week.